Recorded.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 29th meeting of the Statewide Commission on Recycling Markets and Curbside Recycling here in California. And we are going to have, we had planned for a 4.5-hour meeting today with the break at 9:45, and I'm going to move that break till 11. So I just want to give everybody watching a heads up on that. We'll go ahead and proceed with the meeting. So we'll start with agenda item 1, which is the call to order. So we can go ahead and make sure we call the meeting to order here at 8, and we'll do a roll call. Make sure we've got all of our commissioners. Let me see, how would I do this? Does somebody have the list of commissioners in front of them? I'm in Tahoe, so I don't have all my papers like I would normally have them, and I don't have a printer.
I could pull that up.
I think it's on our commission meeting minutes even. Sorry about that.
I've got the list. Heidi, do you want me to call the roll?
That'd be great, thank you.
Commissioner Sanborn, Vice Chair. Vice Chair Ryan here. Tom Bouchard. John Bouchard. I'll see John. Deborah Cadena.
I'm here.
John Davis.
Yeah.
Dan Dell.
Here.
Jeff Donletti. Jeff, you there? Laura Ferrante.
Here.
Joseph Kopko.
I'm on the phone. Yes, here.
Nick Lapis.
Good morning, everybody.
And a little bit John Jones. Hello. Alex Oseguera. Alex.
I see him, but I don't hear him. He
Okay.
might have walked away.
Ann Schneider.
Yeah, good morning, Richard.
Good morning, Alex. Good morning, Ann. Kobe Sky.
Good morning.
Morning, Sarah Toretta.
Good morning, I'm here.
Morning, Ted Ward.
Here. Good morning.
Back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Ray. So we're missing John Bouchard and Jeff Dunleavy. Well,
I dialed in by phone.
Oh, is this Jeff?
Yes, I dialed in by phone. Difficulties signing on with the password.
Oh, sorry. Okay, very good. So we're only missing John Bouchard. Thank you for that. All right, so we'll go ahead and we'll move on to agenda item number 2, which is the review and potential approval of meeting notes. We did receive an email last night from Commissioner Schneider. She had some corrections she would like to make to the meeting notes, and Cycle or Commissioner Ward, we're going to pull those up and see if we could try to make some changes on the fly to address her concerns and any others. So first, maybe we should go to Commissioner Schneider. Would you like to address the meeting minutes and what you'd like corrected?
Thank you, Chair. On page 5, there's under single-use plastics, it talks about the moratorium that Millbrae passed. This is complicated. What we passed was approval to create the moratorium ordinance. So the moratorium ordinance is actually on our agenda next week. So it implies that we already passed it. We haven't. So the language should say that it's a 3-step process. Approved the creation of a moratorium ordinance for synthetic turf.
So it's things to read. Schneider approved the creation. Commissioner Schneider, it's actually not Commissioner Schneider. It would be, I would say, the Millbrae City Council, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so Commissioner Schneider noted that the Millbrae City Council approved the creation of a moratorium ordinance for the purchase or maybe for the use of synthetic turf?
The application of.
The application of synthetic turf. Okay. For her. And then I think we can maybe delete, yeah, a lot of the rest of that.
Just
And
make it
then
simple is good.
Commissioner Ward would like to address resins. I think we could delete the rest of that. For her city until the city can identify the risks and alternatives. Okay, so the final sentence would read, Commissioner Schneider reported that the Millbrae City Council approved the creation of a moratorium ordinance for the application of synthetic turf. I don't know if we need to say for her city, because it's obviously the city council, right? Until the city can identify risks and alternatives. Okay, that makes sense to me. Is there another change you'd like to make?
The other one, I couldn't find it listed at all, but I know that Commissioner Sky said, yes, they would look at that. It was my discussion about how community choice aggregate boards around the state will be looking for other sources of renewable energy, things that aren't solar or wind. And it's not in there at all. But if anyone is looking at it, I want to make sure that every CCA has, what I had said 2 weeks ago was, by law, every community choice aggregate has to buy, they're called RECs, I didn't use that term then, but they have to buy contracts for energy. And they are looking for other renewables that aren't wind and solar. And they are looking at biomass. And the request to the commission was, could the commission look at forms of biomass energy that are good versus bad? And
Okay.
Commissioner Sky said yes, I can't remember which of the committee of two was going to look at it, but they're going to look at it.
It's in the right spot there. And the way I would frame it is looking at best practices for organics facilities.
Thank you, Commissioner Sky.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, the
we
reality is not every CCA in California has environmental issues as one of their criteria.
Okay. Well, let's make sure we get the words right on the meeting minutes and then we can adopt them. So Commissioner Ward is typing away. So it would read, Commissioner Schneider asked that this group investigate best practices for organics facilities, especially with respect to biomass use as a source of energy.
Perfect. Thank you.
So with those two changes, are there any other changes that the commissioners would like to make to these meeting minutes before we adopt them?
I have a small one on agenda item 10. My notes indicate that in addition to working on procurement, Commissioners Kalpakoff and Osaguera were investigating the organics processing infrastructure. Those two were related, so I thought that would be appropriate to call that out as their list.
Yeah, I remember that too. Is that okay with Commissioners Osaguera and Kalpakoff?
Yes, we're fine.
Okay.
Yes, I'm okay.
Okay, so we'll just add that. So it'll read, Commissioner Davis proposed a need to approve some committee on organic infrastructure development and procurement consisting of Commissioners Kalpakoff and Osaguera.
With those changes, I'd move to approve these minutes.
Second?
I'll second.
Good. And then all commissioners just give a thumbs up. Unless, and those on the phone, please just say aye.
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 Opposed to these meeting minutes?
I would like to abstain. I was not present at the meeting.
Appropriate. Thank you so much. So Commissioner Medrano is abstaining and everyone else is given an aye. And I just want to thank, so they are approved, and I'd like to thank the commissioners for reading these minutes and making sure they're accurate. That's very important and much appreciated. Okay, so we'll go ahead now and move on to agenda item number 3, which is the public comment review for items not on the agenda. And I think this is a fairly long list. We've been getting a lot of input and ideas, and I posted things on the documents that were sent to me by people who have different issues. So I'll turn it over to CalRecycle to read the comments that they have, and then I'll try to double check and make sure we've caught them all.
Great, thank you. So I have 4 public comments here. The first one is from Matt Maloney, a concerned citizen. And they say, I live in a community a few miles outside of Chico, California in Nord. We currently have waste management service for garbage only. Green waste and recycling are not offered. Waste management is our only option for service, and they're not willing to accommodate for recycling needs for the Nord community, nor will work together with us for a constructive plan to conserve the environment and not mix recyclables with common trash. Waste management has not provided an alternative for homeowners in the community, despite the fact that Nord County School, which is located in town, has recycling services. There needs to be an effort put forth from either the waste management team or the CalRecycling team to accommodate for smaller communities needing to recycle. My hope in writing this request is that it does not fall on deaf ears or into a black hole suggestion box and nothing gets done. That is the end of the 150 words for that comment.
And before we move on, since we have Commissioner Ursugura from Waste Management, this is kind of related to, it's certainly related to what we do in that we're supposed to be making curbside, less contaminated and increasing recycling rates. And now we have someone who is concerned about their own individual service, which is unique. We haven't had this before. But I guess, Commissioner Ursugura, did you want to take this comment since this is related to your service and respond to him one-on-one, and then just let us know that that's been addressed, or how would we like to handle this?
Yeah, definitely. I'll probably address it in two ways. We do have a franchise in the city of Chico, and it includes certain surrounding areas. That franchise contract does include recycling, organics, green waste collection, and commingled recycling and processing. And so I'll look into this specific situation. It might be the rural nature that it could potentially be causing an issue. And so I will reach out to this person and find out, and then I'll report back. But definitely we provide all 3 services in the city of Chico.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you for doing that. And thank you, Mr. Maloney, for letting us know. Sometimes it's good to just know what people are seeing and hearing out there. So, okay, thank you very much. And then the comment number 2.
The second comment is from Shirley Furrick from Waste Not, Nevada County. And it's, does California have any laws or rules about producers recycling what they offer for sale? I know we just passed the Truth in Recycling and Compostable Labeling, hallelujah, but are you contemplating further controls for them to take it back or arrange for the recycling of their products and packaging? I believe Europe has had this for years.
Yeah, I think what she's referring to is producer responsibility for all packaging. There's a bill in the legislature that's still going, SB 54, which is similar to that, where the producers have to source, reduce, and recycle their packaging. It's not a pure EPR approach as the traditional sense, but so you probably want to watch SB 54, and this commission has been taking up a lot of discussions on these issues with packaging and producer responsibility. We did not agree on the producer responsibility for packaging. We did agree that the producers have a lot of responsibility for market development and education and proper labeling. So that's where this commission landed in our report from last year, and I'd encourage you to look at that report and the policies that we recommended there. Okay, thank you, Shirley. And are there any other commissioners that'd like to speak to that comment? Okay, seeing none. Next comment, please.
So the next 2 comments are pretty long, so I'll be reading them to the 150 word limit, but the rest is published already. So this first one is Sean Levi from Planet Green, and it's attention, Madam Chairwoman Heidi Sanborn, dear State Recycling Commission. Planet Green is a cartridge remanufacturer in Chatsworth, California. We recycle original equipment manufactured, or OEM, printer cartridges for reuse. Asking the Recycling Commission to take action regarding the flood of non-OEM, single-use, non-recyclable printer cartridges coming in from overseas. The print industry is a multi-million-dollar industry that is built on selling consumable printer cartridges. When printer cartridges are used and pulled from printers, they are no longer considered electronic waste. The U.S. printer cartridge remanufacturing industry was created as a solution from the waste generated by OEM printer cartridges. In the past, the U.S. electronic waste industry and the cartridge remanufacturing industry relied on each other to close the loop on used OEM printer cartridges. Currently, the U.S. remanufacturing industry is near extinction because of the non-OEM, single-use, non-recyclable cartridges coming in from overseas. In addition, these products have become, and that is the end of the 150 words.
Okay, and I did post the PowerPoint they sent to me up on the Google Docs. Everybody can look at that. And their proposed solution is a total ban on all imported non-original equipment, manufactured printer cartridges, and all resellers of printer cartridges must take responsibility for the cartridges they sell, providing a prepaid recycling service for used printer cartridges and can verify that these products are getting recycled. So this clearly is within our purview. It's a plastic product that had a huge amount of companies, working on remanufacturing in our own state, and almost all of them are gone now except for this one company, and this was just brought to our attention. So I did discuss with them, there's a national issue here, clearly, imports, but there's also a labeling issue because these companies are labeling them as refurbished and they're not. And there's no sheriff in town for this either. So this is a really big problem, and if any of the commissioners have a suggestion on how we handle this, a committee that might pick it up and run with it, I'm all ears. Commissioner Schneider.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, just wanted to let you know that your voice is cutting in and out.
Oh, thanks for letting me know. Could you hear me? I was just asking for input on the ink cartridges. Okay.
Yes, I could. It just periodically you get really quiet and then you come back.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Ward.
Yeah, and I think what's happening is when you turn your head away from your computer, then your mic drops. So as long as you're facing the screen, that'll work out. I think this is most reasonably under the purview of the single-use plastics group, which is Ann Schneider and I. And in general, we're looking at these sort of single-use plastic products and in two ways, one in terms of resins and the other in terms of categories. So this would be more in the category framework, but there's a lot of work yet to be done there.
Okay, so, and then I see, so your two-person committee would be open to taking this on.
But I think that would be appropriate, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
John Levy.
Yes, thank you. With this topic, I would oppose and recommend we don't address it because this is a federal or international trade issue. The issue with glass bottles, aluminum cans being shipped in from other countries, it could be down to post-consumer plastic that's being shipped in. I mean, this is a big issue. I think it's way out of our scope because there's so many other products that basically the same thing applies to. I think we would just be wasting our time. This is a federal issue.
Well, it's also a market development issue, and we're losing infrastructure in our own state because of it. I'm not seeing it as being out, but maybe I'm alone in this. Commissioner Dow?
You could talk about any product. You could talk about paper being imported and not being...
That's right. And any product that is not being recycled or recovered at a 75% level or higher, to me, is on the list for discussion by this commission, period. Doesn't matter whether it's a federal or state issue. If we're not at 75%, we're not there.
But now we're turning this into a waste commission with everything instead of focusing on curbside, recyclables, and composting. I think we're just getting way outside of our lane.
Okay. And I think that there's also the issue of priorities, and so that's a legitimate conversation as well. Commissioner Sky and then Commissioner Dell.
Thank you. So I do think it's important for us to prioritize, but a quick reminder that one of the first issues we addressed was a federal issue, and it led to a resolution being adopted by the state legislature to put pressure on the federal government to take action on international issues impacting market development of recyclables. So we shouldn't shy away from things just because they're not just limited to the state of California. Things at the federal level are absolutely impacting our ability to meet those very important targets for recycling and for composting. So it's appropriate to discuss what things we want to prioritize because there's so many issues that we can focus on. But that was my reminder.
Schneider.
Yeah, so I support Commissioner Dunleavy's comment. I really think we need to prioritize. We're getting a very long to-do and task list, and I'm not sure how many we're going to have across the finish line if we just keep adding more to this long list. And it is a big issue. It is a federal issue. It's actually an enforcement issue. And if we segment it off to that and maybe have a whole list of those to hit in one fell swoop, so be it. But there are really core things that we should be focusing on, and we really need to prioritize.
Okay, Commissioner Schneider.
I would add to Commissioner Ward and Sky's comments. What I think we are doing with the single-use plastic group of 2 is looking at it at a high level and looking at what can we do as the state of California with what's preventing us from doing as much as we can with waste prevention. So looking at it at waste prevention and reuse as a subset of waste prevention and before recycling. I don't think we're getting into individual products necessarily at this point, but looking at it system-wide.
Okay, I'll make a recommendation then that the 2-person committees can get a lot of comments referred to them. That doesn't mean that every single one of them they have to address, but they need to prioritize themselves and bring them back to us based on what they think are the highest priorities for those 2-person committees. Does that make sense to the commission? Or is there anyone, if I see a thumbs up from one, if there's anyone that doesn't agree.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, I was saying yes, I agree with Ted.
Okay. All right, well then why don't we do that? We'll go ahead and refer this comment to the 2-person committee of Commissioners Schneider and Ward, and then they will put that in the pile and prioritize it accordingly. And all the committees will be doing that because I think it's, I've said this many times, there'll be way more to do than we will have time and volunteer space to do it through this commission. And so we have to remind ourselves constantly of what our key tasks were given by the legislature and what our time and energy is. And some of us have very focused interests and backgrounds in certain areas, and that may be what floats to the top, but I'll load it to the committees to determine what is the priority, and if another commissioner doesn't agree, we can discuss that at the full commission meeting. Okay, so with that comment dealt with, and thank you for bringing that to our attention, Planet Green. And I can talk with you offline about some other ideas I have. Any other comments? Power cycle?
There's one more public comment. Again, the full comment is published. I will only read 150 words. This is from Aldous Hicks from Lasso Loop Recycling. Lasso seeks to change California and U.S. domestic recycling for good. Lasso Loop Recycling LLC, or Lasso, seeks a conversation with CalRecycle for 2 reasons. Firstly, to allow Lasso to apply to have its domestic recycling appliance considered for approval to return California CRVs to householders through their Lasso domestic recycling appliance. The process could be like what was required to approve RVMs providing this service. Secondly, that CalRecycle investigate allowing Lasso to be considered for pilot projects and associated with California cities or counties. Lasso has submitted initial requests to CalRecycle and seeks a dialogue to enable Lasso to explain the Lasso domestic closed loop recycling process and obtain responses to its 2 questions. Background: Lasso Loop Recycling LLC, Lasso seeks to empower householders to closed loop recycle 100% of their valuable used containers and used materials that are closed loop recyclable. These include PET, HDPE, brown glass, green glass, clear, and that is the end of the 150 words.
Okay, so in short, this is a small appliance that would go in a home that they've created that somehow sorts CRVs and garbage and other things. And so to me, it sounds like it's kind of a CRV issue, but I'd be open to commissioners' ideas on if this is something we should be looking at all, or this seems to be more directed towards Cal Recycle for their attention. Commissioner Ward? I can't hear you, I'm sorry. You're mute.
I think this is appropriate to be dealt with by the Bottle Build Group, which is myself and Commissioner Valle, and to determine whether or not further commission action is warranted.
Agreed.
Okay, then we'll go ahead with that unless anybody else has a opposing thought. Very good. And again, just because I just want to remind everybody who submits comments, just because you might not hear back or it doesn't get prioritized doesn't mean we don't hear you. It's just that maybe it's not our priority based on what we've determined our task is and our priorities and time. So I just want to put that out there again. Very good. And if there's no other public comment, then we'll go ahead and move on. I did miss a meeting the early part of the meeting last week when the city of Palo Alto had raised an issue about moving or having some sort of traceability for recyclables through the system. Did that get given to a committee? I wasn't clear. Can anybody respond to that? City of Palo Alto's, Commissioner Valle, do you remember that conversation at all? About the City of Palo Alto's request?
I don't recall that we assigned it to a committee specifically.
I'm not sure. I mean, to me, that would be a recycling issue as to whether that things are traced around the world. And it's not just bottles and cans. I don't believe it's all materials. So I'm not sure if there's a thought on what we should do with this comment or refer it. It's a pretty big, it's not directly fitting into anything, I think, except to make sure that things land.
I would guess that market development might be the likely committee if they want to consider it.
Okay. And the market development is Davis Sanborn, and then the Sandy is myself, Commissioner Toyota. Maybe John, you and I can just take a look at that again and see if there's anything that we think the commission should do or not, and get back to Palo Alto. Is that okay? I hate to leave people with no, ending to it. So we'll go ahead and review the Palo Alto thing and respond to them and let the commission know what we think, if there's a priority or not.
Just a few quick comments on that. One, I think it's an interest of many communities, especially with our foundations of trusting that when we put something in a recycling bin that it actually gets recycled and ends up in the right place. We really need to reestablish that trust, and that's what I see Palo Alto trying to deal with here. I also recognize that there are limits on what information is actually passed once something is exported out of a port. And so I think that's going to be the fundamental roadblock we're likely to encounter. And I do think this is one of those issues that may be far beyond what the commission.
Yeah. I mean, we did ask about making sure it's called recycled only if it's getting recycled, if it's exported. And I guess this is just trying to assure verification so that the cities can be assured that that's the case, which is a very important point for them because they can't tell right now. They're operating blind. So we'll take that up. Commissioner Davis and I will discuss that and get back to them and you. Okay, thank you very much. So I think we're done with agenda item 3, and we can now move on to agenda item number 4, which is a presentation and discussion around the management of aerosol products. We've got several presenters today, and I want to thank them all for their time, volunteering their time and expertise to share with us. This was brought up by Vice Chair Valle. And aerosol products, as you know, can potentially explode. They are expensive to manage. There's many products that are in aerosol containers now. And so we have 4 presenters. We thought we'd really do a deep dive together on this. Andrew Johnstone will be up first, and he is from Alameda County and an artist, and has been working on these products for a while. Then we have Nicholas George with the Household and Consumer Products Association, followed by Manny Chung with Product Care, which is the HHW EPR program manager for multiple product types, including aerosol paints, regular paint, gasoline, oil, landscaping equipment, and more up in British Columbia and Canada, several provinces. And then Jeremy Jones with Paint Care. I did not receive a PowerPoint from them, so I just assume he's going to talk with us about the Paint Care program and any interest in dealing with aerosol cans. So we'll go ahead now and we'll turn this over to our first presenter, Andrew. And it looks like your mic is on, so you can share your screen and show us your PowerPoint, which I did post on the Google document.
Okay,
welcome,
great.
Andrew. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody. Good morning. I know we've been having some problems with the audio. Just letting you know, I'm from Scotland. I always sound like this, so any other problems is your own problem. So I'm not familiar with GoToMeeting. So if I just press share screen, I'm good to go.
Yes, you should have received a pop-up asking you to share your screen.
All right.
If you can't, we do have your PowerPoint. We could show it and you can just say next.
GoToMeeting, yes.
And maybe while he's doing that, Richard, you can give us a little introduction on Andrew.
What can I say? The creativity of Andrew Johnstone is well known in Alameda County. He created a full-scale, huge wall mural for our district attorney's office, Nancy O'Malley, that's pristine and beautiful. He created a full wall mural here at Tri-State Recycling of the Golden Gate Bridge in our break room. And he actually painted the entire warehouse, 70,000 square feet of surface that faces out to the street here at Tri-State, and it looks like a forest. And our biggest problem has been we have birds smashing into the wall because they think it's a forest. He's also the creator of the Burning Man. He builds the Burning Man. He comes up with the concept of the Burning Man, and he's been doing that for well over a decade. And he's the guy who was first on site at the desert and last one to leave.
Okay, so he's an artist, but he also works a lot with these aerosol paints, which is what we're going to focus on today, in the waste management of the aerosol paints. So Andrew, it looks like we've got your screen now, so we just open your PowerPoint. We can go ahead.
Okay, so are you looking at my PowerPoint right now?
Oh, thank you.
Great. So as I said, my name's Andrew Johnstone. Let me see if I get this one. Let me get that out of the way. Okay.
Oh, we lost it. We've lost him. Let's see, maybe we should pull up, let's see if Nicholas is here, just in case we have to move them around. Is Nicholas on yet?
Yep, I'm here.
All right, well, Nicholas, we might have to go ahead and, if it's okay with you, get started with you until Andrew can get back on.
Yep, certainly.
Does that work? Okay, fantastic. We'll make you the presenter. So welcome, Nicholas. They've been eager to share with us what they know about all these aerosol cans. And so Andrew, I think you're back, but we're going to go now with Nicholas's presentation,
Okay,
and we'll
sure.
go back to you. I'm sorry.
That's quite all right.
Weren't sure how long you'd be gone. Okay, so we'll let Nicholas go, and then we'll turn back to you. So you can
All
make
right.
it full screen. There you go.
Yep.
So, hello and thank you for the opportunity to present today. My name is Nicholas Georges. I'm with the Household and Commercial Products Association. HCPA has represented the U.S. aerosol products industry since 1950 through its aerosol products division, representing the interest of companies that manufacture, formulate, supply, and market a wide variety of aerosol products packaged in the aerosol delivery form. Now, for this presentation, I believe one of the more important parts of, that we need to start off with is what is an aerosol. And I say that because the average consumer doesn't necessarily know what an aerosol product is. They understand the type of product they are purchasing, such as their hairspray, insect repellent, or air freshener, or the brand name of the product. And I will say anecdotally here in DC, when I'm talking with other trades about aerosol products, I often hear that, from the people that I'm talking with, that they don't have aerosol products in their home, and when we start discussing the delivery form, they realize that they have several different types within their household. These products have gained their recognition and value, not just based on their ingredients, but also the delivery form itself that has created and defined and is inseparably bound to these product values proposition for the customer. The U.S. aerosol industry produces just shy of 4 billion aerosol products each year. Roughly 80% of those are in a steel container, and approximately 20% is in a high-grade aluminum container. Obviously, both metals are highly recyclable, and there's considerable environmental benefits when using recycled metal as opposed to virgin material. This slide shares a number of benefits which aerosol products provide. Hopefully this was read before today or will be read after this presentation, and if there are questions on the benefits of the delivery system, please let me know, but I'll be skipping it otherwise. Here's a pie chart showing the breakdown of various products. For a category breakdown, the U.S. market is unique when compared to the rest of the world, and I say that because our overall percentage of personal care products is considerably less than what you would see in other countries. But with that said, depending on the market within the United States, you'll see a different set of product mixtures. Those with sun and beaches tend to get more sunscreen products. Aerosol or areas with more of a wilderness will have more insect repellents. But if you have questions on where individual products fit into this breakdown, just let me know, because there's a long list of products that fit into these various product groups, whether it is a cooking spray, disinfectant, asthma inhaler, spray paint, so on and so forth.
I'd like to highlight right here that it's only 12.63% that's paints and finishes. The majority is household and personal care and auto. So just wanted to point that out.
Yep, and so, just to share, we do an annual survey of the entire industry. We go to every manufacturer of aerosol products, as well as the container and valve suppliers within the industry, conduct a survey to get these numbers done.
Mr. Ward, do you have a question? Can't hear you, I'm sorry.
It looks like that chart indicates that well over half of the products in aerosol containers contain hazardous materials. Would you agree with that statement?
So this chart, I wouldn't say, shares that they contain hazardous materials, but it also depends on what hazard you're talking about. I mean, an aerosol, by its nature, is a pressurized container, so when the product is full or partially full, it's going to be hazardous just because of the pressure in itself.
And the contents, I'm seeing insect sprays, paints and finishes, auto, lube, and industrial. Those would all be hazardous. I would imagine that a good portion of the household products, although I acknowledge what you say, if there's any product in an aerosol container, it is by definition hazardous. The contents of the product itself, as I'm seeing it, about half of them are hazardous products themselves. That's what I'm trying to do.
Which hazard are you relating to? Are you relating to the flammability? Are you looking at more the chemistry and from a toxicity standpoint?
Any of those things that would label them as hazardous under California law. That would be all of them.
Yeah, I don't have any data specific to that end of it, but it's certainly something that we can try to get a response for in terms of surveying for future needs then.
Thank you. Move on.
All right. So going into the heart of why we're here today, and that's discussing the recycling of aerosol products. And whenever I'm talking with someone in the recycling stream who doesn't accept aerosol containers, inevitably I hear about their fear that an aerosol container can cause a fire, and I think that gets to the heart of what you're going after here too. And so when I ask them about their experience with aerosols causing fires, particularly around any data that they may have, I get it, what I'll describe as an anecdotal story is that there was an aerosol can within the material where there was a fire, so this is then considered the cause. And going back to that little exchange there, I do feel it's important to state that not all aerosol products are flammable. Some don't undergo any sort of combustion, and there are also aerosol products that will put out a fire. So while we can't just naturally assume that every aerosol product is flammable, as it relates to the recycling stream, that is a conservative approach to make that they all pose that kind of hazard. Now, when an aerosol container does go through the recycling stream with contents that are flammable, it's important to remember that you need enough vapors to reach the lower explosion limits, and that is the amount needed for the vapors to ignite, provided that there is an ignition source. When many think of ignition sources, and this does include myself for when I was in R&D developing products that were flammable, it's common to think of things such as sparks and flames as ignition sources. But another common ignition source, this one is you're all aware of because of your work on this issue, is batteries. And we are interested to see how the removal of batteries from the recycling stream may lead to a decreased concern over fire incidents, and how that could increase collection of other materials once that risk is significantly reduced. I mean, you all have talked about the data that's been coming in, whether it's EPA's report or other sources of the consequences of batteries in the recycling stream. And again, we are interested in seeing what would happen when that hazard is removed. We've had FM conduct a risk assessment of recycling aerosol containers. They concluded that the likelihood of an accident with no significant consequences was evaluated to be low or remote, while the likelihood of an accident with significant consequences, such as a fire, was evaluated to be very low. So this isn't to say that there is no risk, but FM did provide us with guidelines to reduce risk, such as minimizing the amount of stored flammable material around different parts of the sorting process, the baling area and the bale storage area, removal of potential ignition sources around the baler and bale storage areas, and having adequate fire protection systems in the event that there is fire, as well as improved consumer awareness of not disposing partially used products into the recycling stream and instead disposing those within household hazardous waste programs. Now, the most recent project for the U.S. aerosol industry relating to the recycling of our containers concluded this past February. HCPA and the Can Manufacturers Institute, also known as CMI, sponsored resource recycling systems to survey MRFs and end markets on the barriers to recycle aerosol containers and identify solutions. We did this so that we can get a more accurate snapshot of the current state of affairs for recycling. This included 13 MRF operators composed of 11 independent MRFs and 2 national MRFs, which represent approximately 25% of the total number of MRFs in the United States and approximately 50% of the total U.S. tonnage. Because each MRF is a bit different from one another, we try to get a good picture across a number of different MRFs, both in size and location, and there was a MRF representative from California within this process. In my opinion, the most important thing we learned from this project is the robust end markets for steel and aluminum aerosol containers. In discussions with individual companies that recycle these materials, not only do they want more material, but if we were able to get every aerosol can recycled, they'd still want more. The steel aerosol containers remained within all the other steel material, while aluminum aerosol containers are typically sold with other non-used beverage container aluminum and gets turned into either deox or remelt scrapping goods. But we did also hear about, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I think we have a question from Commissioner Lapis.
Certainly.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, this is on the previous slide, although it's relevant to this one as well.
Okay.
So I think that the point you're raising is incredibly valid, right? So if I can boil it down to the way I understand it, it's basically if you put an aerosol in the recycling bin, chances are it'll end up in either the ferrous or non-ferrous will separate it and they'll end up getting recycled. And so the back end is there. But what I've heard from MRF operators is that the risk of fire is not worth it. And that consumers basically, consumers would not be able to differentiate that, some types of aerosols go in the recycling bin, some don't. And if it leads to any increase in aerosols that are flammable in the recycling bin. It's not worth it. Now, if I understand your last slide correctly, you're saying that the actual risk of fire is overblown, no pun intended, and that it should not be as much of a risk as it is. So I'm curious just to hear from the MRF operators on the commission, and maybe this after you're done, I apologize for interrupting, if they agree with that, if that's their personal experience, if that's their client's experience, because I think that's the crux of the issue, is your previous slide, or this slide right here is the crux of the issue.
Yeah, and again, that isn't to say that there isn't any sort of risk. I mean, that, you know, we aren't saying anything of that nature. You know, I would say that an empty aerosol container, regardless of what the contents were previously, you know, that doesn't pose a hazard. I mean, by nature, it's going to be empty. And you know, when we get a little bit further onto a couple slides from here, you know, I'll get into more of what we are going to be doing into the future here to you know, help better, you know, whether, you know, develop data or from that data, you know, make more appropriate assessments and possibly redo this risk assessment with updated information. But, you know, certainly, you know, again, that isn't to say that there isn't a risk, but you know, from the assessment that we had done for us, and you know, there are assumptions being made into this assessment, particularly around, you know, again, with each MRF being a little bit unique in different manners. They had to make assumptions based on what a generic MRF was. So an individual MRF may have other, you know, complications that a generic wouldn't have, but again, there are general guidelines on how do we reduce that risk. And I would say that's not just for aerosols, but that's just good, you know, practices overall as well that we can get into if desired. But heading back over to go ahead.
No, why don't you go ahead and continue? I do find it, but I mean, to me, this is kind of getting to the crux of the issue that things get put on the market, the back end of the system is expected to deal with it. And even if it's a low risk, it's still a risk. And we still pay insurance, you know, to deal with these risks, and those costs are going up. So I just point out again, you know, the back end of the system is having to address the front end stuff coming at us without warning. And this particular category seems to be growing significantly in the market. So look forward to hearing the rest.
So just to make the comment about the you know, growth of the aerosol industry in the United States is rather a mature market. We have been relatively flat for the last 15 years. You know, over that period of time, the growth may be about 1%. So we're not even, you know, we're not keeping up with the growth of the population of the United States, just from that standpoint. You know, but you know, I will, you know, going back to this slide, you know, I will say that you know, beyond what I previously shared, we did also hear about challenges that MRFs identified with recycling of aerosol containers. And that also does go beyond whether the aerosol container is empty or not, and if the container isn't empty, you know, what sort of hazard may that pose? You know, for instance, if the steel aerosol container isn't punctured during the baling process, the sealed container can cause a molten metal splash when it's being smelted at a steel mill. On the aluminum side, because aluminum aerosols are a different grade of aluminum from used beverage containers, and you know, one with far fewer other non-aluminum elements than what is used in the used beverage container. We do use a higher purity grade of aluminum. The aluminum mills don't want them from that standpoint, and even though there are, you know, again, robust markets, it's not as easily obtainable as it would be if you could just include an aluminum aerosol container in with the used beverage containers. So that does go into, you know, what the aerosol industry is currently working towards. We want to get these products to a point where everyone recognizes these products as recyclable without question. Based on the feedback we've received thus far, which includes that RRS project as well as other individual conversations we've had with various MRF operators and markets, we're looking to proceed with a number of projects to reach this vision for aerosol container recycling. This includes addressing data gaps that we have identified thus far, increase the acceptance of aerosol containers at MRFs, and improve consumer awareness of how to recycle their aerosol products. From a data gap standpoint, HCP and CMI previously shared with the Commission an overview of the data that we have on the acceptance of aerosol containers, both in looking at MRFs and at the population for California. Though that data is from 2016, and we're looking to obtain updated information with the changes in the marketplace. Based on our 2016 data, along with other data points that we have, aerosols do meet the requirements of the FTC Green Guides to be labeled recyclable. However, we recognize with the passage of SB 343 and the likely updates to the green guides that we will need additional data to support that claim. Determining the baseline of the recycling of aerosol containers within the state of California isn't as easy as it is for other materials, and that's something that we need to work at. While we know the number of products produced in the United States, and we can make assumptions based on population data on the number of aerosol cans sold into the state of California. There isn't any sort of data that's set that we can use to calculate the baseline. So this project will involve consultants going to MRFs within California to make measurements so that we can attain enough of a sample size to then determine what is the possibility of what that California baseline recycling rate is. There's also the question of whether or not aerosols entering the recycling stream are empty or not. So we're going to be looking to conduct measurements to help answer that question, both in terms of weight as well as measuring any potential pressure a product may have residual entering the stream. Then there's also an environmental and economic impact project so that we can better tell the story of why recycling is beneficial both to consumers and to the recycling stream of aerosol products. And for the MRFs, going back to the it's not worth our while for the potential risk. I do think that gets back to the heart of making that economic case as to in our minds why it's beneficial. But again, so that they are armed with the information and I'll say that part of these conversations, particularly on the aluminum side, the aluminum containers are from what I'm being told, are being sold to scrap dealers, essentially pennies on what they could potentially make, and so it's helping justify the economics of recycling the containers then. Regarding the acceptance of aerosol containers, we want to continue to engage with MRFs to understand their concerns, and at this point we're hearing repetition, but you never know when someone else will bring something up. We want to work with the waste haulers to minimize their risk and showcase the economics. And we think that by hiring a consultant and offering that to MRFs on how to improve their operations is a step in that direction. There's also the as I said, there's also the economic case of accepting aerosol containers, and even with those MRFs that already do accept, are they maximizing the value of these metals? And so that's something we also want to engage on, because we've heard, especially on the aluminum side, as I just mentioned, money essentially being left on the table, and that's something we want to address. We are looking at developing industry guidelines for communicating to consumers how best to communicate how to recycle. That's in part how we go about labeling aerosol products and what we can do to better educate consumers there, as well as creating toolkits that can be used online to help educate consumers that want to look online as to how to do it, as well as communicating with municipalities so that they can talk to their own individual people within their area. Part of that challenge.
Just a moment. We've got several people who are in the queue. So we've got Commissioner Dell and then Commissioner Ward, please.
Right. Thanks for the presentation. I mean, I think we all hope we can find a way to reclaim these products at some point and do it in the right way. I just wanted to let you know that this commission did a really detailed survey last year of what MRFs accept, product by product. And there's 75 MRFs in California, and that spreadsheet is available to the public. There's 75 MRFs in California, and I just looked at our spreadsheet, and 44% accept aerosols. This is the data that we found. And then I was just actually looking up the US EPA report. I think from the 2017 report, I'm trying to find the 2018, but I think the aerosol recycle rate was at about 15% in the country. Anyway, it is important that we use facts, and I just wanted to bring this fact that the commission found that currently the acceptance rate is 44%, but we have no idea whether those are actually recycled after that in California.
So to those points, and as I mentioned, our data for the acceptance of 2016, which is why we want to go back and obtain updated information for that, so that we can compare and contrast that. If California is below indeed below the 6%, which is what your research indicates, we need to address that. I mean, we need to address it anyways because we want everybody to accept aerosol cans. But and then going back to the baseline recycling rate, in conversations we've had with EPA, they don't have an overall baseline rate for aerosol cans. So that, again, that is something that we know for California we need to go off and address here. So anyways,
okay.
So going back to communicating the recycling of aerosol, or I'm sorry, are there any other questions before I continue?
Yes.
I have a quick one. So my concern is that essentially you're selling product that has consumer benefit, but you're essentially acknowledging that there is some risk, and MRF operators are essentially saying they don't want to take that risk on behalf of your product. And so what I would suggest is that you start addressing that very aggressively, in that the scrap value itself is probably not an adequate benefit to have these MRF operators start accepting these materials at a higher rate. So I think you're looking at equipment, processing, and specifically, I think you should be looking at underwriting the insurance of the operators that accept those products, because you really need to address the risk as part of your risk, as opposed to the risk and just assuming a MRF operator should take that on, because I'm not sure everybody agrees with that.
So I greatly appreciate that suggestion. It is something that we as an industry have discussed. We've also discussed the potential of, helping MRFs put in updated fire suppression systems as well to adequately handle any sort of risk that they have. So there are various options we can go about that, and we look forward to the engagement on that discussion. Part of that is we want to, because what we hear is I'll say anecdotal. We want to go off and actually measure things to go on and better determine what is that risk, so that we can adequately determine how best to proceed forward. But again, thank you for your suggestion on that one. And I will say, well, let's go past, we're looking on how to better educate consumers, and we don't need to necessarily get into that piece right now unless you want to. But, I will say at the end of the day, just like that, we want input from all stakeholders and to engage in dialogue on how to continue to increase providing, again, in our minds, what is this, valuable recyclables to the end market through the most acceptable pathway for both consumers and waste haulers, while avoiding landfills and waste energy. As we've seen on this slide, again, there are a number of things that we're looking to do in 2022, and this list can always evolve to include other things as more ideas come up, such as whether it's underwriting insurance costs for those that accept, or whatever it may be. So what I will say is we are willing to pursue other projects if we are pointing towards a different direction. So in short, whatever is acceptable, whatever is an acceptable doorway, so that everybody succeeds here. We don't want to cause any issues of that kind. So with that, I would just like to thank you all and take any other questions that they may have.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. I appreciate it. I'll ask a question, then we've got a few in the queue. Has the industry at all looked at the cost benefit of actually investing in things like, the insurance and new equipment and all that stuff versus just delivering the product in something other than an aerosol?
So we have had conversations with fire suppression system companies on what that would look like. We have not done a deep dive into insurance costs, because so far whenever we've asked questions about insurance, MRF operators have not been willing to talk about their specifics. And understandably so. I mean, I don't think that anybody wants to expose anything that their competition may have an advantage over. But we have had conversation about this fire suppression system. Specifically, we've talked to a company called Fire Rover about their equipment, and what
more
that looks
interested
like.
in the source reduction piece of the question. I'm sure we can get into details about the cost of all the other stuff, but what I guess I'm saying is, usually prevention is cheaper than the cure. And so has there been any discussion about source reduction and getting the product delivered in other things besides aerosols?
So not so much in terms of moving away from the delivery form. There has been discussions and there has been efforts to move away in certain product categories from flammable items to such as the propellant to non-flammable propellants. That is a shift that is taking place in the marketplace today for various reasons. So that risk is being reduced while still using the aerosol delivery form. Is to say transition from a hydrocarbon propellant to say nitrogen. That is taking place in product categories.
Yeah. So basically, no, just reformulating the propellant. Okay, so I think we've got a couple of other commissioners, and then we've got to get to our next presenter, and then we can do a big panel at the end with more questions. So we'll do Commissioner Lapis and then Osagura, and then we can start teeing up Andrews so that we don't have to worry about switching the slides too much, so we can probably take this set down.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, thank you for letting me talk again. I think this is really important. I think what Heidi brought up is a very interesting angle about maybe the industry helping to fund some of the fire suppression, but also on the source reduction side as well. Because, I feel like we need to find a way to make these products recyclable or phase them out of the system, because the embedded energy in a steel can or an aluminum can aerosol is just so huge that if that product is not recyclable, if it doesn't get recycled, it almost feels like the worst case scenario from a packaging perspective. And it does come down to the MRFs feeling comfortable and accepting it. And I guess part of the purpose for this whole commission was to give local governments and curbside MRF operators an opportunity to speak directly to manufacturers instead of just getting, handed stuff that they have to deal with on the back end. So I do think this is a really important conversation that we need to keep having. I'm thinking in the context of 343 and labeling, but could we maybe get to a point where there is a label that, says something like recyclable when empty on, non-hazardous, non-flammable aerosols, or is there something along those lines where we could get to a point where MRFs are comfortable telling consumers to put it in the blue bin? Because right now I think they're not, but it's something, again, that I feel like we need to either figure out or frankly move away from this packaging.
So, so Commissioner Lapis, what I'll say is that, certainly let's continue this dialogue. I think that the starting point. What I will say though is, you've made the comment that, there's a lot of energies in these containers, but what I'll say is when the container is empty, that energy is gone. And the reason why one of the projects we want to look at is to assess.
Actually, Nicholas, I think what he was referring to was actual embodied energy in the actual can, not how much pressure was in the can.
Exactly. Thank you. Yeah, just embodied energy of steel and aluminum as material types.
Okay. What I'll say though is that when the container is empty, the flammable hazard no longer exists, and so that's something that we have to explore, is to understand what is the shape of these cans showing up and as they enter into the MRF. Is it that is it 99.9% of cans are actually empty as they approach there? Is it whatever that percentage may be? That's something we have to realize to say, what is the current state of affairs, so that something can be done about it. There's been discussions on, is there, when the consumer is done with it, a safety valve so that the consumer can release that safety valve, and the contents is then released, so that the container then is going in and not serving as that hazard then. Is there something that we can engineer of that regard then?
My response to that, though, would be, why would we release stuff to the air and pollute the air for no reason if it's not? I don't know. I just think there's a lot of in-depth discussions that need to happen around this, and it's going to be probably referred to a committee so we can continue to work on this. Let's go with Commissioner Osadura, and then we'll move on to our next speaker and the panel at the end.
Chair, this is more of a comment than it is a question. I guess, for me, and I think I will speak a little bit here for the industry. Vehicle fires are not anecdotal. They happen all the time. Major fires have occurred in Southern California, Northern California, and so I guess I take exception to the word anecdotal. Facility fires are not anecdotal. There has been significant fires in many of the recycling facilities up and down the state. I'm not saying specifically, Nicholas, that it was your product specifically caused those, but in many instances, it's quite likely that it was. And so that's not anecdotal. And so, to further respond to the comments that you have made, definitely we would like to see, the safety, study that you've done, and how was it done, how many products, how did you measure that these cans are empty and not flammable and do not cause fires? And so for us to have a response to your anecdotal comment, I would like to, see if we have a copy of that study. That would be my comments, Chair.
And certainly, I don't mean to diminish when a fire does happen. That was not my intent, and I apologize if it came off in that manner. My comment was more just in terms of what the cause of the fire was. That's the piece that we hear the stories that an aerosol caused it, and when you ask the question of how do you know that the aerosol caused it, that's the piece that remains the unknown. I certainly don't want to diminish both the risk that fires pose or when they happen. Certainly for across all material types that can pose that hazard. We as a society need to do something about that, and I would say that the aerosol industry wants to step up and do that. Relating to the emptiness of the container, that is something that we look to do in 2022. We don't have the data on that, but certainly we would more than be happy to share that data once we have it so that we can engage that conversation then.
And we're going to take one more question and then quickly move on to the next speaker. Commissioner Ferrante, please.
Yeah, thanks. Not a question so much as a comment. I want to echo a lot of the comments that I'm hearing coming from a lot of the commissioners, and to kind of pull together what Commissioners Ward and Sanborn and Lapis were saying. The value in the material does not appear to be worth the risk to the facility operators. And that's what Commissioner Oseguera was saying. I mean, vehicle fires, facility fires are on the rise. And I really want to, I'm really intrigued by Commissioner Ward's suggestion that, and I'm not to lay into aerosols because there are several products in the waste stream that could be causing fires, aerosols, batteries, et cetera. But for any product where there is this risk of fire, that those producers take on that risk themselves and take on that concern as their own concern. Thanks, Commissioner Lapis, for saying what you said, but the whole point of this is to kind of get a say in these products before they enter the waste stream, and we have to clean up these problems. So the truck fires, the facility fires, the insurance issues associated with that are very, very serious. So thanks, Commissioner Ward. I think that's a great idea about having these product manufacturers take on that risk and that liability and be part of that solution for the MRF operators.
I think, Nicholas, at this point, we're going to, and I just want to reiterate that this is what I've been working on for over almost 15 years, is the fact that all these costs have been externalized from the manufacturers onto the waste haulers, the environment, local governments, and it's unsustainable. And so we need to look at all the different costs and externalities and figure out how to get them back where they belong, which is in who makes and designs and sells and profits from these products. Otherwise, we have socialized costs in the waste stream. So with that, I'll end this part of it until we get to the end. And then, Nicholas, if you have other things you'd like to say and share with us, we'll be happy to take it at the end of the other presenters. So thanks again very much for being here. We really appreciate it. And we're going to turn it over now. Thank you all for your time. Yeah, and we'll look forward to hearing from you more at the end. We'll turn it over now to Andrew. Hopefully we've got Andrew's system up. Awesome. Thank you. Welcome back.
I apologize for that. That was, I'm still struggling with the thing. So good morning and thanks. My name's Andrew Johnstone. I'm a fine artist. I'm also the director of Big Picture Art. We're a not-for-profit. We work with graffiti offenders to work with empathy and trying to redirect them to making art without victims. We also advise juvenile justice systems, schools, cities, county agencies, and I also occasionally have the pleasure of presenting to international conferences on graffiti. I know this is a conversation about paint aerosols, but you can see that there's a huge overlap between the problems of graffiti and paint aerosols. Human beings are painted on walls as long as we've had walls. Expressing themselves through art is a really uniquely human instinct, and it's part of our DNA, and it's something that can't really be turned off, especially during years of puberty. Over the past 40 years, as we've removed arts and crafts and engineering from our schools, it's left a creative void, and without a positive direction, it's assumed a negative outlet of graffiti. In history, however, the tools available were small and impermanent until we get to Ed Seymour. In 1951, Ed Seymour invents the paint aerosol can, and that starts the nuclear age of graffiti. By the Paris riots of 1967, it had become the tool of choice of the graffiti artist. It's concealable. It lends itself to a font that's angry and immediate. And we live with its problems every day in our cities. How much is this costing us, graffiti? You're going to have to start breathing into a paper bag because this is going to get a little rough. Graffiti is costing us, for cleanup and introduction, is somewhere around $20 billion. That's a tough number to deal with. It's more than we spend on the space program. It's 4 times the amount of property loss than from stolen cars. And if you start piling up dollar bills, $1 million is a stack of $100 bills 43 inches tall. $20 billion is a stack of $100 bills 73,000 feet tall. If you stepped off the stack, it'd take you 7.5 minutes of free fall before you hit the ground. And we spend that every year. If that weren't bad enough, there's also the environmental costs. If you laid the 500 million aerosol cans, paint aerosol cans I'm dealing with, not regular aerosol, but paint is my concentration. If you laid them end to end, they go around the Earth 2.5 times. That's how many we're talking about. And this will give a good idea of how many we're dealing with here. It's 12 to a case, 6 to a pallet. And if you sprayed that all out, it'd occupy 369 square miles. And if you drove around, it'd take you over 2 hours to drive around that paint at freeway speeds. And we do it every year. So what's in the can? Well, you've heard that noise. That's the sound of the urban landscape. That's the P, the agitator in the bottom. There's some paint in there. There's the propellant in there. The propellant is propane. It's the same stuff that's in your backyard barbecue. And this is the DNA of aerosols. It's a list of stuff that you shouldn't do. There's acetone, there's methylene chloride, there's toluene, there's xylene. And some of these products are terribly, terribly damaging to your nervous system and to your brain. It causes permanent brain damage. And kids find a cheap high by inhaling these things. They attach to the dopamine receptors in the brain, and it's almost an addictive thing, just like major drugs are. We also have to look at the transfer efficiency rate. What that is when you press the valve on the top, how much stuff goes onto what you're painting and how much stuff goes into the air. And with paint aerosols, it's surprisingly low. It's about 40% goes on what you're painting and about 60% goes into the atmosphere. And remember, these are some volatile organic compounds and some really desperately bad ones. This is to scale for a presentation I made in Sacramento. And that's how much volatile organic compounds we're putting into the atmosphere every year just from paint aerosols. Do not puncture. We keep hearing this, as you were talking about it, people were saying, oh, you shouldn't put those things in garbage because they're under pressure. People don't realize how much pressure. It's nearly 8 times atmospheric pressure. And remember, this is a volatile bomb of hydrocarbons. Don't do that. So what do we do with the waste? Well, there's the paint care system. It seems to be a great solution to the problem. You take there's the till charge that's put on your bill, and there's a recycling program and responsible end-use disposal. You hardly even notice it going onto your bill. It sounds like a perfect solution to the problem of paint aerosols, except they don't take paint aerosols. They take paint, they take this, but they don't take paint aerosols. And they the paint lobby successfully argued that paint aerosols are not an architectural coating. Well, that may be so, but I'll tell you what, they are an architectural coating if they're sprayed onto your architecture in the middle of the night. And then it becomes your problem, not their problem. In fact, what do you do with these things? I mean, my struggle is with graffiti. And in all fairness, it's not with the paint industry. But I don't see them taking responsibility for this in the slightest bit. I might be a little bit more generous if I saw a glimmer of contrition or ownership of the problem. But all I see is them moving the problem to somebody else's doorstep. I'm not saying that the paint industry started this war, but they've certainly provided the bombs and bullets. And if they were an oil company and messed up a beach, they'd be expected to clean it up. And if you take one of the rattle cans and you divide that 20 billion by the 500 billion, you get the average amount of damage per can. And every can that's produced, once it gets onto the streets, it results in $50 worth of damage once it gets onto the streets. And in fact, CATCO, which is a foundation which is sponsored by the aerosol paint industry, suggests that you throw them into the household waste. And that's typically what happens. A realistic scenario is that somebody buys a can of spray paint to do a small project. The can holds enough paint to cover 25 square feet, but the project needs to be far less. So that partially used can gets put in the shed along with all the other used cans, and they pile up for a number of years until you can't stand it anymore, and you throw them in the garbage with the rest of the other stuff. That's typically what happens. They're not going to recycling. And this is what we're dealing with. 100 years it takes for a paint can to settle down into a recycling. So what can we do? Well, I've got 3 suggestions. Immediately, we should put paint aerosols and include it into the paint care program. I'm suggesting that we put $1 on each paint aerosol that's returned. If we did that, it could potentially raise $500 million. And I'm suggesting that what this is used for is to be used for cleanup and also to buy art supplies for Title I middle schools so that we can deal with the problem of graffiti at the source, which is this creative outlet. However, I have problems with paint care because paint care was spawned from the ACA, the American Coatings Association. It's actually an organ of the paint industry. And it was set up kind of to divert EPA and federal regulations away from the paint industry itself by setting up its own organization. I think there's huge problems of oversight, and it's kind of like the wolves watching the sheep. I think that it needs state oversight, an audit, and I would like the money taken in, if it's included within paint care, to be put into a separate escrow account so that it can be more accurately dispersed. Other alternative might be a complete ban on these products. Now, that sounds draconian, but many products reach the end of their useful life. Once upon a time, paint had lead in it. We don't do that anymore. DDT was sprayed at public pools on kids. We don't do that anymore. There were flame retardant asbestos baby blankets. We don't do that anymore either. And whale oil lamps once lit every kitchen in America. But maybe paint aerosols have come to their end of their responsible, useful life. I'd like you to consider that. The final thing we can do is nothing. We continue to absorb $20 billion in damage, 154 million pounds of VOCs, and have $500 million of these things going into our landfills every year. The trade-off is that we have nicely painted yard furniture, but I don't see that as a good bargain for our societies. I really thank you for your time. I hope I kept it within 10 minutes. I'm going to put a couple of links on the in the chat so that you can download my book. It's called Contents Under Pressure, appropriately enough. And it goes into very deeply into the problems around graffiti and also the problems around paint aerosols. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I just want to highlight that the chat is only seen by the commissioners. And so whatever you put in there, Commissioner Ward, if you could quickly upload it to the Google so that everybody can follow. And I guess is this the link here, Andrew? Bigpicturearts.com.
That's our website. How can I get off screen, off present? Oh, there we go. Oh, here it goes. If I do that,
Public can.
well, I'll put it in the chat afterwards. Does anybody have any questions? I'm sure you do.
I'll just start by saying thank you. This was very informational, and I did want to highlight that as a person who worked very hard on the Pink Care program to get it started, there is state oversight of that program by CalRecycle, and they get audited financials, and while they're in charge of the program, they have to, the goals are set by the state, and or at least the state has to approve the goals set that the industry puts in, and ultimately has the final say. So yeah, I just want to make sure you know that. So Commissioner Valle.
Thank you, Andrew, for that presentation. I thought that your recommendation about putting a tariff, a bounty, a charge on every can makes a lot of sense. When you buy a beer bottle, you pay a nickel. And same thing with a soda, you pay a nickel. And that's the recycling program that we have in the state of California. I'm not sure with regard to this presentation and the previous presentation, do we have a charge on aerosol cans at the counter? And if so, where does that money go?
I can say one thing to that, that the Air Board has a program that's a $10 charge for refrigerants for cars. Those containers have very toxic, very climate damaging gases. And so they chose to put $10 deposit per can that the producers are now running and doing the PR campaign for to get them back. So there is a precedent there through the AIR program for that. That's the only one I'm aware of.
Yeah, my thought is if you're buying a can of hairspray or whatever it is, an aerosol can for painting, if we put a charge on those cans, that would make a lot of sense as opposed to, for example, in the previous presentation, fire suppression systems, which are costs that we, the MRF operators, we have fire sprinklers overhead in our warehouse. We have fire sprinklers overhead on our sorting line. We have fire sprinklers underneath our sorting line. We have fire sprinklers over our baler. We have fire sprinklers throughout the entire system, but we can't insert fire sprinklers inside our balers or inside piles of recyclables that are waiting to be recycled. And it's usually the contact between a blade and a can, aerosol can, when that friction is made and that contact is made that it creates the ignition. We've had several fires inside our balers with the ram as it moves forward, back and forth with friction and a volatile substance inside the baler, which you have no control over. And then we had several fires on the recycling floor when a front loader blade moves in contact with the cement and something that causes friction, ignite a can literally on the fire, on the floor. So there's different ways of these things that ignite, and it doesn't take much material to be inside these cans to ignite these fires. You'd be surprised how often. It's probably about every third day that we have a minor fire inside the baler or on the recycling floor. It's rare that it happens on the sort line because everything is exposed and open.
Wow.
So I just wanted to throw in those comments. And thank you, Andrew, for your presentation.
In my presentation, I suggested $1 on each can. And earlier in the presentation, I pointed out that we're incurring $20 billion a year in graffiti damage nationally, and there's 500 million. And I said that the aggregate amount of damage per can comes out to about $50. Every can that's produced is responsible for $50 worth of graffiti damage somewhere in our community. So a dollar charge is only representing about 2% of the offset of the damage. I think that's entirely reasonable. And yeah, I had no idea, Richard, that the incidence of fire is so prevalent. I've heard of paint aerosols being in cars and heating up to, cars can get well over 100 degrees. And I've heard of them exploding and catching fire in vehicles. So it doesn't surprise me that that could happen at a recycling facility. If I, parenthetically, if I have to go and do a presentation out of state, I can't get on a jet with a paint aerosol because it's considered too dangerous to go on board a jet. But I can go down to Hayes Hardware and buy as many as I want. Does this make sense?
We're going to have to keep moving, unfortunately, to stay on time. So there's two more commissioners that have comments. I'll ask you to keep them very quick, and then we'll move the rest to the end. So Commissioners Ward and Donlevy, please.
My quick comment is that while I applaud the idea of incorporating aerosol paints into the paint care program, I do feel that aerosols as a package have the same problem as batteries do, in that customers, when instructed to put any aerosol in any particular place, will probably do that with all aerosols, but not necessarily just for paint or just for whatever you designate. So I think it's important that if we think about how we craft a program for aerosols, that it does address all aerosols. I also think the presenter should understand that right now aerosols are technically not recyclable in California, and we really want to get to the point where they are. That will take aggressive action. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Ward. I just put in the chat the link to the Air Board's deposit program for small automotive refrigerant containers, so everybody can see that. And then if you could post that on the Google Docs so the public could see it too, I'd appreciate it. And then quickly, Commissioner Donlevy.
Yes, thank you. Andrew, very good presentation. Your work is very impressive. I've seen it over at TriSed, and I agree with Commissioner Valle. With the birds flying into the forest, it looks like a park. So beautiful work that you've done over there. Thank you for your suggestion about the dollar deposit. I think, as Commissioner Sanborn has pointed out, with the automotive refrigerant program, I think that is the solution for that product. I think we've seen it with the used motor oil, where consumers put down a deposit per quart, and they're able to take it back to different locations to get their money back. And we've seen it with the bottle bill. You know, all those wheels are running. The state knows how to run those programs. Some good, some improvements definitely needed. For aerosols, I think it could be a solution. I like the dollar suggestion for food grade aerosols, but I would put a higher number on flammables and chemicals because those are the most serious ones that are causing exposures and fires. I've taken an employee to the hospital because pesticide material or something that was in an aerosol got in the person's face up on the sort line. So I would support a deposit program for aerosols, but I would put a higher premium on the hazardous waste items that are basically purchased over the counter. And then the state could do that with in-store take-back. They could even go back to recycling centers, household hazardous waste facilities. I think we have the infrastructure in California to roll such a system out. So thank you for your presentation and simple solution.
Thank you so much. Great presentation, Andrew. Look forward to hearing you at the end here. We're going to move on now to our third presenter, Manny Chung. He's with the Canadian Stewardship Program called Product Care. It started as paint care, and then they evolved to take on all kinds of different products. Many of them, if not all, are toxic and hazardous. So Manny's been an expert in running this program. We invited Mark Kirshner. Mark is the program manager for the entire, or director, and Manny is the operator of the program. So we're super fortunate to have him. Welcome, Manny. Can we go ahead and turn this over to you? You ready?
Yes, thank you, Heidi. Can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can. And we can see the screen, but it's
Hello,
not
can anyone hear me?
full screen yet. Let's go to
Okay.
full screen. And the key for us, Manny, is not only the what you do, but the money flow and who's in charge, who pays, all that kind of stuff.
Right. Oops. Sorry, I'm having a little difficult getting it to full screen, so.
There is an option to swap the two displays in the section you just were. I think that will do it.
Hang on 1 second. Sorry about that.
An icon.
Does that work?
No,
Yeah,
it's still showing us the second slide.
Yeah, if you go to the display settings and you swap the presenter view and
Okay. Right. It's not allow me to do that function, unfortunately.
okay.
Okay, well, I guess what we can. All right. Well, would you like us? Would it be easier for the commissioners if we have Commissioner Ward present it through the Google Docs folder so they could see it?
I think so. Otherwise, it'll be kind of small and hard for the public to view.
Thank you for
Okay,
that.
Commissioner Ward.
Documents. Where is that folder? Where is
Oh, I'm
this
sorry.
document?
Google folder. Let me see if I can find it real quick.
This is Laura. I can pull it up really quick.
That might be easiest.
My apologies. I'm so used to Zoom and Teams go to meetings, just not.
I know everybody's got a different system. This is fine. Okay, we can see it now.
Okay.
Go right ahead. Thank you.
Well, good morning, commissioners, and thank you for the opportunity for inviting us to present today. We've been asked to provide a high-level overview of how aerosols are managed in Canada, specifically related to the programs that Product Care Association manage under a stewardship program. I want to make it clear we're not here to advocate whether they should be managed under a stewardship program or how they should be managed, but merely to respond to the requests of saying what's happening in Canada with related to aerosols. So that's really what my presentation is about. A little bit about myself. I'm the Vice President of Operation for Product Care Association, and I've been in the hazardous waste management industry and the stewardship industry for approximately 30 years. So, and focus mainly on the development of programs, the implementation of programs, and the day-to-day operations of program, along with regulatory compliance and filings and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, so I'll give a short high-level presentation. Feel free to stop me and ask questions, and we'll go with there. So if you don't mind, next slide, please. So just the agenda, a little bit about Product Care Association, then talk about the framework of how we operate our programs, which include some aerosol products, and then we'll talk a little bit about the types of aerosol products that are managed under our programs. We don't manage all of them, but only specific types of aerosol. And then we'll talk a little bit about how we manage those aerosols. So next slide, please. So getting to a bit about Product Care Association, if we can move to the next slide. So we are basically a not-for-profit industry association that was really developed in 1994 with the first stewardship regulation or law that was passed in North America, and that was in British Columbia in 1994. We're federally incorporated as a nonprofit, and really a result of extended producer responsibility regulations. We act on behalf of industry to meet the obligations of EPR regulations, and our board is really made up of industry-based directors representing different sectors, including retail, manufacturers, distributors, but also different product categories. And we'll get into that a little bit later on, and you can see. So as I mentioned, we're responsible for meeting the compliance of the regulations on behalf of those industry members. And the products that we are currently managing within our organization is paint, household hazardous waste, lighting products, and smoke alarms. You'll see a little later on, we also help other industries in terms of dealing with other types of stewardship programs, but they're not what I'll call in-house programs. Next slide, please. Out of the 10 provinces in Canada, we operate in 9 provinces with stewardship programs. And the one province that's glaring will be Alberta. Alberta is, their regulatory framework isn't what we call a true extended producer regulation framework. It doesn't assign the responsibility over to industry. It does require industry to pay, but not allow industry to come up with a solution. So that's the only reason why we're not in the 10th province. Of note of interest, we also operate the lamp recycling, mercury lamp recycling program in the Washington State, working in cooperation with NEMA, the Industry Trade Association for Lighting Products. We worked with PaintCare was mentioned earlier. We did work with PaintCare to implement their first stewardship program in Oregon. And also in the background to provide some support when they moved to California and Connecticut as well. So we are currently behind the scenes working with the mattress recycling program in California that you folks are very familiar with. And we kind of help them on the more administrative side in the background and so forth. So below, there's a list of the product categories we have and the provinces that we have stewardship programs specifically for. And I won't go through each one of those, but you can certainly see the variety that we have. And the reason why they are, why there's more paint than HHW, it's because those provinces, we respond to regulations. So for example, if you look at Nova Scotia, there's no HHW program. That's because there's no HHW regulations. However, there's HHW regulations in BC, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario, and that's why we're there. And then at the bottom, you'll see that there are a couple other ones that are regulated in British Columbia, such as small appliance and power tools and then outdoor electrical equipment. So we also provide management services for those programs. It's not our program, but we help them manage their program. So next slide, please.
Just confirm, the alarms are have radioactive components, correct? The smoke alarms?
Only certain types of alarms. There are 2 types of alarms. One has a radioactive cell in there, but the radiation levels is extremely low. Obviously, there are rules and regulations around that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have it in our household and things like that. But not all alarms have a radioactive component to it.
Yeah, I was surprised because a lot of people don't know that. Thanks.
Actually, I think if you look at the back of it, there is usually a symbol on there that if you pay close attention, you'll usually see it. So this slide just gives you a more pictorial view of the programs and which province we operate. You can see every province is colored in turquoise or teal, with the exception of Alberta, and the icons indicate the type of programs that we currently operate in those programs. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk a little bit about the framework in terms of how our programs are operated and how they're funded, how they're governed, and things like that. So next slide, please. So the key thing is that all our programs are regulated under an extended producer regulation. So that is the driving force behind these programs that we operate. It's regulated by the province, which, it's equivalent of the states in the U.S. The 4 categories we currently have within product care are paint, household hazardous waste, and I should say, the categories related to aerosols are captured under the paint regulation, the household hazardous waste regulation, and the paper and packaging regulation. So those are the regulations of stewardship programs that have a component that deals with aerosols. The way they're funded is typically funded by industries, and the industry could be defined as the producer, the first importer, the retailer, the distributor, and more challenging, the online sales people as well. And the definitions vary by province, just like your state regulations vary by state. And so we have the same challenge. Here is the regulations vary in terms of definition, vary in terms of requirements and so forth. The regulations typically require an approved program plan by the regulatory body. So the regulation spells out what the requirements are. The industry puts forward a program plan, usually through a stewardship organization such as ourselves. And within that stewardship plan, it states how we're going to address the requirements of the regulation. And then the oversight body, in some cases, it's the Ministry of Environment. Sometimes it's a delegated authority that does a review and then approves it or disapproves it and so forth. Usually once it's approved, then the program has to start and operate. So, so it's really another term that we use for our stewardship programs or organizations is producer responsibility organization. And these are the folks that typically manage the program on behalf of the industry, the obligated industry members. The program, the regulations typically cover certain areas that the program must deliver on. So the program responsibilities include public education, province-wide collection, transportation system, obviously a material management system, regulatory compliance and reporting, and in some cases performance measures as well. These programs are typically funded through what we call environment handling fees, much like the mention that Paint Care has a fee. That's the same way that Product Care operates in terms of the products that we will talk a little bit later on. We have those fees. The paper and packaging, the fees are not visible. They are, paid by industry, but it's not passed as a separate fee to the consumer because they're fractions of whatever pennies and things like that, depending on the type of material, the volume of material, things like that. So the regulations provide flexibility in general, not all the cases, whether the fee rates can be visible or invisible or internalized, and the fee rates are set and determined typically by the producer responsibility organizations. So it's not set by the regulator, but the fees are set intended to build up enough funds to operate the program on an annual basis. In some cases, a bit of reserve fund is created to be able to smooth out, the ups and downs of sales and other influences that are beyond the control of the industry. So that's usually how it's managed. The funds are obviously fully separated and used for the management of the programs. In many cases, the annual reporting requires the submission of financial audits and reports to verify the numbers that were, the fees that were collected and how much fees were expended at, and so forth. As I mentioned before, it could be the oversight could be the Ministry of Environment itself or a designated oversight body by the ministry. So, any questions? If not, I'll continue on. Okay, hearing none, I will continue on then. So just moving on to products, and if we can move to the next slide, please. So just to give you an idea of the products that are covered. So the regulations typically obligate consumer products and exclude industrial formulation. So we're not talking about things that you would use in OEM applications or things like that. And that's typically the regulation. Not always the case, but in general. Under our program, I'm going to speak specifically to our programs right now. Aerosols are captured under two product categories. One is the paint programs, the other is the HHW program. So under the paint program, general definitions more or less go around paints and stains and so forth. Typically architectural paint sold in aerosol containers and also includes already empty containers. So that's the common theme across the 8 programs that we have related to paint. We've made a determination as an organization as it's difficult to differentiate between, for a consumer, whether the aerosol can was an industrial application one or a consumer application, whether you use it to touch up your car as a spray paint versus spray paint using on your barbecue, whatever. We decided as an organization that we would include all paint aerosols. This includes something like maybe not as familiar with you folks, but tree marking paint. It's BC, British Columbia, for example, has a huge industry for forestry. And, not many people do know, but they actually use a ton of spray paints to mark the trees for the processing and so forth. So there's our programs include all spray paint into our program, regardless of use and application and so forth. So that's the paint program. In our HHW program, the aerosols are typically covered under 4 categories. One being a flammable liquid or solvent category, the second one being a pesticide category, and then a corrosive category and a toxic category. Now, not all our HHW programs are the same. So in British Columbia, the regulation only obligates flammable liquids and pesticide. It doesn't obligate toxics and corrosive. In Manitoba, it would obligate all 4. So what I list here is just broad scope, what are covered in our programs across the board. Now they're defined.
I'm sorry, can you answer one quick question? In any of these programs, since the commission was just asking about this, is there a deposit on any of these cans for to incentivize consumers to return them correctly?
The model we have is not a deposit model. The model is very similar to PaintCare's model. So when you go buy these products, you pay environmental handling fee up front. And that, in our mind, hopefully triggers the consumer to say, hey, I remember paying a fee on that. I'm done with thing. That fee has to have a purpose. And there must be a home for this and just thrown in the garbage can. So yes, the fees are paid, but not in the form of deposit. So when you return it at a collection site, there's no money given back to you. So it's an upfront fee to pay for the management of that product.
Yeah, so it's just a visible fee program managed by the producers, but there's no deposit to ensure return. Okay.
That's correct. And in most cases, it's visible. Not all cases. I got to make that clarity. So.
Okay. And can you give us a range of what those costs are per can?
Yep, for sure. So for paint, and again, for us, every program stands on its own financial merits because the cost of doing business in British Columbia is different than the cost of doing business in Ontario. Things are all different, but we want to have transparency that the money collected for the BC program is used for the BC program and not used for the Ontario program. So we have separate financial accounting for each program and separate tracking of what was sold in British Columbia and what the expenditures were and so forth. So just give you an idea for paint, the fee range for a paint aerosol can ranges from 20 cents to 45 cents. And that fee rate is determined by our board. So if a particular program is running into a deficit, then we have the ability to adjust the fee higher so that we have enough funds to run the program. Because if we don't have the funds, we have nowhere else to get the funds. So it has to come from the stewards, and therefore we set the fees to make sure that they're sufficient to be able to manage and operate the program. In terms of the HHW fee category, it ranges anywhere from a penny to 15 cents, just because there's different sizes. Typically aerosols can range in those broad, categories. Paint is very specific. It's very uniform. and very consistent. In the HHW area, it's all over the place. And so we've got different fee rate and depending on the size and things like that. Just to give you a sense of probably one of the questions, well, how much do we actually get back? So on a program like British Columbia, where we have a population of a bit over 5 million, on an annual basis, we're collecting anywhere over 700,000 units of spray paint cans only. So that gives you a size of, obviously every program is different depending on the maturity of the program and depending on a lot of it is behavior to consumers. We're quite a green province, if I can say that, proudly to say. And so we tend to do the right thing most times. But switching back to the definition, want to make it clear that it's not all, flammable aerosols. It's the regulation sets the definition. In this case, in British Columbia, the determining factor is the flash point of the contents of the aerosol can. Obviously, all aerosol cans, if they have a flammable propellant, such as propane, will be flammable. We're focusing on the content. Whether, the most common thing you'll see is like WD-40, for example, is something that would be captured under the solvents category in British Columbia. So the pesticide, again, it's not all pesticides. It must have two components, one being the Pesticide Registration Act number on it. So it's registered as federally as a pesticide active ingredient and the poison symbol on it. So you could go out and buy some pesticides that won't have the poison symbol. The poison symbol is really a level of hazard, in our terms anyways, that the active ingredients can pose to the consumers. Corrosive, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm like Commissioner Ward ask a question real quick, and then we're going to have to move on.
Okay. Just wondering are there any aerosol products that are non-hazardous that are included in the program? And if they're not included in the program, are they contaminants in the program, and how are you managing those?
Okay, so my next slide will address partly that, and if I don't address it completely, please raise that question again. So I just I won't go into too much detail, but you get the sense of how they're defined. It's specific in regulation. As I note, all our paint aerosols and HHW aerosols are collected through a depot system or a collection site system. We do have a few events, but those aren't our main method of collection. There are limited empty aerosol containers that are collected through what we call the blue box, or you might call the curbside program. So next slide, please. So we talked about what aerosols are captured under our programs. Now, there's another program, and I'm by no means any expert on it. So I'll give you just a high level. If you're interested in details, I'm sure Heidi can link you up with the other program. But my understanding, again, this is my understanding, that in the paper and packaging program or the blue box program or curbside program, empty cosmetic, beauty products, hairsprays, air fresheners, shaving creams, the ones that I think Commissioner Ward was mentioning, non-hazardous, where they go, well, the curbside blue box program is able to take it. But again, they have programs throughout Canada as well in certain provinces, and they may differ from province to province as well. So I'm not sure they collect all of them, but they certainly, when you look it up, it looks like they collect a good amount of the other non or less hazardous, I'll call it, depending what it is. It really depending on what the propellant is in there. I think in terms of these products, obviously they're not really meant to be hazardous. We're putting it on our skins and we're putting on and so forth, but there's the propellant factor. Some I assume are non-flammable propellants and others may be, not sure. Next slide, please. So we'll talk a little bit about what happens and how do we manage these products. Next slide, please. So in Canada and likely in the US, the aerosols are classified and managed as hazardous waste. So that means that they're subject to the Transportation of Dangerous Goods regulation, which is federal, kind of your DOT equivalent. And also There may be additional provincial regulations that are layered on top of the transportation of dangerous goods. They are, in most cases, subject to fire code regulations for storage if it's over certain amounts and things like that. So you may have to put a cage around the area that is storing lots of, spray paint or household hazardous waste aerosols. Typically, the propellant in the products that we handle are flammable, and it's propane and things like that. And so that is part of the hazard as well. You'll see on the right-hand side the machine called the cruncher. That is really what we say specialized equipment. So we have one of these crunchers ourselves. It's a specialized piece of equipment that is designed to process aerosols under a intrinsically safe and environment. So basically there's a hopper that opens up, you pour the aerosol cans in, it closes, a nitrogen blanket's hooked to the machine that forces all the oxygen and air out of the system. So even if you have friction, fire, things like that, there's no oxygen, you don't have fire. So what happens then is that mechanical action takes process, and the cans are broken and squished. The paint, the residual paint, comes out through the bottom and then we pump that into a drum and manage it accordingly. The propellant, interesting enough, is not just let through the air. We actually evacuate that out of the system, the propellant, the nitrogen, and then we recompress it back into cylinders, and then we send that for hazardous waste management treatment. So what you see on the bottom are bricks, they're called metal bricks actually, and that's the result of hundreds of cans of aerosol cans being crushed at high pressure to produce that. Each one of those bricks are not too big, but they weigh about 20 to 30 pounds, depending on the size that we set it at. The picture in the middle is a bunch of those bricks, and you can see the color. It could be art, depending on what color aerosol cans went in. I could say that in this batch, probably a lot of tree marking paint because it's so consistent that you're having one color, which is kind of the bluish color. And that's how we can determine that. The residuals in terms of the HHW, we have to manage that either physically, chemically treated, or incinerate, depending on what the contents were. In terms of the paint residual, we're using it for energy recovery because there's so much different formulations and volumes are low that we can't really, it's not feasible to try to recycle that product into recycled content paint as we do with liquid paint. We'd certainly do that. And then the empty containers, including these bricks, are sent to scrap metal recyclers and into the recycling market. So one of the things that I will caution is when aerosols are included under a stewardship program, it's not, it's more complicated than your standard, paper and packaging or something like that at the collection site, transportation, processing. Obviously, you have to look at local bylaws in terms of, and then fire code, building codes, and that sort of stuff as well. So next slide, please. And I think that basically concludes a high level of what we do and how we do it. And my contact information there. Happy to field any questions.
Thank you so much, Manny. And I want to thank Manny and Mark because I'm on the board of the California Foundation for the Environment and the Economy, and we set up a trip for our legislators to go to British Columbia. And a few years ago, we actually saw their antifreeze and oil recycling and the aerosol cans up there. So thank you again for all that you've done and for all the support you've been giving the United States on our programs as well. So we've got one question from Commissioner.
Sure, Heidi, just one correction. We don't operate the glycol oil recycling facility. We just brought you to a facility that is under another stewardship program.
I'm sorry, correct. Yeah, thank you. Commissioner Bunny?
Thank you for the presentation. My question is, you mentioned earlier about the charge or the deposit, that there is a fee on certain containers, but can you explain again the chain of, does that go to the provinces or a central location, and that helps to administer the program and the oversight that you're a part of?
Yeah, that's a good question. I should add more clarity. So basically what happens is when a regulation is passed, obviously they give a certain amount of time for the obligated stewards to meet those obligations. In our case, we would, if industry has requested that Product Care get involved, what we'll do is we'll obviously do some modeling, some data analysis, come up with a program, how it's going to work, things like that, estimated budgets, get some data in terms of what kind of volumes are sold. And then we develop a fee model, which is what I mentioned before, the ranges of the fees. And then what we say is, look, we're filing a program plan with the regulators, and if the regulators approve, we will be operating this plan. And typically we will then invite industry members to say, hey, we have an approved plan by the regulators that meets this regulation. You are welcome to join our association. It's open to all that are obligated under that regulation. But as a requirement of joining our regulation, this is our funding model. You agree to pay these rates to Product Care directly. It's not a tax, it doesn't go to government, it comes directly to us. We, in turn, because you are self-reporting to us what you sold, and because our fees are based on per unit, we have an obligation and a right to come into your business and audit your books to show that you are indeed paying the right fees on the right amount of material sold, and it's in the right province, applying the right fee rate, and so forth, because it's very, very important to us. It's a fair playing field for the industry members that are all obligated. We don't want anyone, accidentally, bypassing the system, or accidentally forgetting to report some sales or things like that. So the money comes directly from the obligated steward to Product Care, and Product Care uses that fund to pay our service providers, to engage, for public education, communication, buying ads, paying transporters and recyclers and so forth. I hope that answers your question.
It does in some part. I'm sure there's a lot of more detail about that. For example, the last question, a facility operator or recycler, so they get a fee based on the amount of product. How do you audit them in terms of how you compensate them for taking those products?
Yeah,
that must be a very in-depth approach that you have.
Yeah, so you're absolutely correct. We have, a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Very detailed tracking schemes that we track from the point of collection to transportation to the consolidation facility to the recycler or waste management company, depending on what happens to the product. There's a tracking scheme there. In terms of how the service partners are paid, whether it's transportation, collection, or the recycling or disposal side, that's really, we deal with it as a business-to-business case scenario. So in other words, we would negotiate a rate with our paint recycler and say, okay, for this type of paint, we want it to be recycled. What's your price for that? And then we, negotiate and work out a deal, and that's how we pay them. And so we'll track how much volume sent to them, what was agreed upon rate to pay them, and that's how that payment's made.
And I'd like to add to that this is actually a reason why I'm not a big fan of these visible fee programs anymore, because the amount of oversight it takes and management to make sure every retailer is correcting the proper amount and all of that is wasted in the system. Whereas when you have the producers actually really pay for the program and pay into the stewardship organization, there's a lot less administration and a lot less confusion. And I've never seen a public study that says that a visible fee is somehow a big educational tool for the consumer. I've heard this repeatedly, but we've never seen a study. If somebody has one, I'd be very interested in seeing it. So anyway, that is, we're going to have to move on because we've got a 10:15 hard stop with CalRecycle having to do a presentation. So I'm going to quickly go next to Commissioner Medrano, and then we'll probably hold public comments until after we make sure we hear from Paint Care.
Thank you, Chair, and I certainly echo your comments on the program. The visual fees certainly just add to the oversight. I have a question on the chemistry of the makeup of the chemistry. Perhaps might be for somebody else, but you mentioned, Manny, the propellant, non-toxic and toxic. It was at least a toxic propellant part of what made up overall the toxicity of the product, or was it only on the product itself in the container?
So for the products we manage, it's both. Obviously, the propellant being typically propane, it has its hazards, but the products in itself, because it's paint and HHW, it would itself be hazardous. You know, the corrosive nature or the pesticides or the flammability of the product itself, besides the propellant, is a hazard. I can only speak of the ones that we manage. I can't really speak about the shaving cream and the cosmetics and the other thing, so forth. But you know, something like the spray, the hairspray obviously is flammable because you've seen it so many times in a movie. Someone put a lighter to it and it becomes a little bit of a torch. But yeah, for our products, yes, it's both the hazards within the content itself and also the propellant.
And Chair, if I may ask another question really quickly. You mentioned that the deposit, Manny, you mentioned that a deposit as a return to ensure that recyclability or proper management was not considered. Was there any type of study, anything done to say why that was not an option available? I'm thinking of some propellants now, like the refrigerant, that you have to now pay an extra $10 to get that, and then you have to return it to the retailer to get that money back. And that seems to, I would imagine that's working great because that's $10 people don't want to lose out on, and then ensures proper recycling. Was that ever actually considered? And if so, why was the decision otherwise?
To my knowledge, I don't think I'm aware of any studies around that area, and doesn't mean that there isn't one out there, but the length of time I've been involved with these programs, I've not seen a study that's related to that. The main product that in Canada that may, and not all provinces have it, that do have a deposit on it is the beverage containers, so soda pops and those sort of containers have it. But as far as whether it's electronics or tires or oil or any of the other kind of EPR programs, there's no deposit on those.
Okay, we're at 7 minutes after 10 and we're going to have to stop and hold because we definitely want to hear from Paint Care. So Jeremy Jones, are you there? And then we'll